Welcome to the Syria Spectrum, bringing you policy through perspectives. I'm your host, Sami Akil. Each month we unpack the political, social, and regional dynamics influencing Syria's present and future. In this series, we go beyond the headlines, bringing you the grounded analysis and thoughtful insights from key experts across the Syrian and international policy landscape. Before we dive into today's episode, we need to set the stage right to understand where Syria stands today and how we got here in the first place. For 14 years, Syria was engulfed in a brutal civil war. More than 500,000 people were killed, over half of the population displaced, and the conflict drew in every major power across the international and regional spectrum, from Russia and Iran to Turkey and the US. ISIS rose and fell, frontlines froze, repeated diplomatic efforts foundered. A humanitarian disaster spilled across borders, reshaping perceptions and regional pressures. Then, on the 27th of November, the turning point arrived. What began as a limited counter-offensive to push back regime forces shelling Idlib province and its peripheries, codenamed Operation Deterrence of Aggression, quickly escalated into a sweeping assault that shattered regime lines across northern and central Syria. Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, HTS for short, led the campaign, backed by factions belonging to the Syrian National Army. Over the following days, regime units collapsed under combined pressures: precision drone strikes, local uprisings, and the complete disintegration of regime command structures. Major cities began falling one after the other. Aleppo on the 30th of November, Hama on the 5th of December, Homs on the 7th of December, and finally, the crown jewel of them all, Damascus, on the 8th of December 2024, forcing President al-Assad to flee the capital and bringing an end to over 5 decades of Assad regime rule. Following the regime's collapse, government institutions, which had long been in a state of decay, had virtually ceased to exist. Hayat Tahrir al-Sham long positioned itself as a quasi-governing actor under the Salvation government in Idlib, moved swiftly to fill the vacuum, presenting itself as the sole actor capable of maintaining stability, public order, and administrative continuity. In the weeks that followed, HTS and other allied factions turned towards institution building. On the 29th of January 2025, the Victory Conference took place, announcing the end of the Syrian revolution. At this event, Ahmad al-Shara was declared president of the transitional period in Damascus, tasked with guiding the new political order. In February 2025, the National Dialogue was convened. Its outcomes were formalized on the 25th of February and served as the input for the constitutional process that led to the constitutional declaration signed on the 13th of March 2025. However, the months following the regime's collapse revealed that transition did not necessarily mean stability. From the onset, the transitional government under President Ahmad al-Shara sought to consolidate its position through diplomatic outreach, pursuing sanctions relief, foreign investment, and normalization of ties with regional and Western capitals. The goal was clear: secure recognition and economic recovery, as well as projecting the image of law and order abroad, even as the situation at home remained fragile. Yet this outward focus came at a cost. Domestic governance, security, and accountability lagged behind, and the realities inside Syria told a far more turbulent future. In the immediate aftermath of the regime's collapse in December 2024, Israeli airstrikes intensified across southern and western Syria, targeting Syrian military hardware, air defense sites, and weapon depots. These strikes paved the way for a limited Israeli incursion and the establishment of a de facto security buffer stretching from Quneitra, Daraa, and rural parts of Damascus, a presence that continues to this day. By March 2025, instability spread westward. The coastal governorates of Latakia and Tartus, long considered the former regime's stronghold areas, witnessed massacres, retaliatory killings, and armed clashes. Then in July 2025, unrest erupted in Sweden, where Druze local forces clashed with security forces of the transitional government over questions related to autonomy, conscription, and the limits of the central authority. The clashes highlighted the widening divide between the peripheral regions and the transitional administration in Damascus. Meanwhile, in the northeast, the Kurdish-backed Syrian Democratic Forces maintained their de facto autonomy under US protection, engaging in drawn-out negotiations with the transitional government over representation, resource sharing, and security integration, talks that produced few tangible results up until this day. By the time of this recording, the gap between international diplomacy and domestic reality had become unmistakable. While the transitional government in Damascus sought legitimacy abroad, Syrians at home continued to grapple with insecurity, economic collapse, and competing centers of power. Against this backdrop, the October parliamentary elections emerged as the government's first major test, a bid to translate its external legitimacy into internal credibility and prove that the transition could be institutionalized through the ballot box rather than on the battlefield. The basis for Syria's first post-Assad parliamentary elections was stipulated in the Constitutional Declaration of March 13, 2025, which outlined the legal framework for the transitional period. It established that the People's Assembly was to be the central legislative body, tasked with overseeing government functions and representing local constituencies. Under Article 24, 2/3 of the members would be selected through local electoral bodies, while the remaining third would be directly appointed by the presidency, a structure that placed the ultimate authority in the hands of the executive branch. To implement these provisions, President Ahmed Bashar issued Decree No. 66 on the 2nd of June, creating the Higher Committee for the Elections of the People's Assembly and setting the chamber size at 150 members. Later, Decree 143 was announced on the 19th of August and expanded the seats to 210. It also introduced a temporary electoral law defining administrative districts and eligibility rules. Campaigning ran from the 29th of September to the 3rd of October, followed by polling on the 5th of October and the announcement of the results on the same day. While the vote was hailed by the transitional government as a key milestone for political mobilization, it unfolded against a familiar backdrop. For decades, parliamentary life in Syria under both Hafez and Bashar al-Assad had served more as a mechanism of control rather than representation. The People's Assembly then, operating under the Progressive National Front, functioned as a formal extension of the Ba'ath Party dominance, rubber-stamping the executive branch policies rather than shaping it. Elections were held regularly, but their outcomes were predetermined. Power flowed downward from the presidency, not upward from the electorate. Today's People's Assembly, though anchored in new legal texts, still carries echoes from that legacy. Its composition and oversight mechanisms reflect continuity more than rupture, a controlled process designed to project order rather than empower participation. And so, the October 2025 elections became more than just a vote. They were a stress test for Syria's post-Assad transition, a moment to measure whether the new political order can move beyond symbolism and towards genuine legitimacy. To discuss how these elections unfolded, we turn to our guest. I'm joined by Mutasem Al-Syoufi, the Executive Director of the Day After organization. A longtime advocate for democratic reform, Mutasem has been active in Syria's civic and political landscape since the early 2000s, taking part in the Damascus Spring and the Damascus Declaration movements. Under his leadership, TDA has become a leading organization advancing Syria's democratic transition, supporting electoral governance, training local councils, and providing technical assistance to Syrian transitional authorities in lead-up for the Parliamentary 25 elections to promote transparency, inclusivity, and credible participation. Mutasem, it's a pleasure to have you with us.
It's my pleasure also to be with you, Sami, today. Thank you for hosting me.
Obviously, it's a turbulent period in Syria's transition, and there's obviously a lot to unpack. But I want to just dive right into it, basically try to unpack what those elections mean to Syria's political future. So how would you basically assess the performance of the elections? Were they actually meant to deliver change or just simply deliver a result that was predetermined?
Well, basically, I have a problem when we call it elections, because I don't believe that we went through an election process in Syria. We went into sort of selection/election process. According to the constitutional declaration, well, if we go even an earlier step, when the Victory Conference authorized President Ahmed Bashar with all powers authority, then the constitutional declaration was adopted. It stipulated or decided that the president would select a committee to form People's Assembly, and there is even a problem with the naming, because when the Victory Conference, it was called Legislative Council. So they mandated the president to form a legislative council, while in the constitutional declaration they changed the name to People's Assembly. And I believe, personally, I believe it's more of legislative council, that a part of a transitional authority is being instituted, rather than an assembly that represents the people of Syria. So the president selected a committee, and this committee selected subcommittees, and these subcommittees selected electoral colleges, and the elections went through these or took place within these electoral colleges. And we're talking here about around 7,000 members of electoral colleges in total. The procedures of the elections took place in a very short period of time, relatively. So we did not see in the results and the final results, we did not see, according to our assessment, sufficient consultation between the subcommittees and the district, the people within the districts, within the regions, within the governors, they were in charge to form the electoral colleges. So there was a lot of ambiguity about how the subcommittees were selected, how the electoral colleges were selected. And apparently, we're now dealing with an assembly where, of course, many of the names, I saw many of the names, I know many of them, they took part in the revolution. They are respected people. With other names, many were surprised with these names. They did not know, they knew nothing about them. But again, even within the revolution, they represent one component of the revolution. They do not represent the diversity of the revolution. Because, the Syrian revolution is similar to any other revolution. There are parties, political orientations, various groups, etc., take part in the revolution. So even within that revolutionary umbrella, the current assembly represents a component within that spectrum, a component that is loyal to the president, loyal to the transitional authorities. The other problem is, of course, the March 10th agreement between SDF and the central government, the central transitional government, has not been executed fully yet. They're still negotiating the implementation of that agreement. That limited the People's Assembly from representing the 3 provinces in the northeast. After what happened in Suwaida and the massacres that happened, also Suwaida is not represented in that assembly. So there is an issue, a serious issue, serious problem with the level of representation of this assembly of the Syrian people.
Well, this is great, and I think this is a very good overview of the process for our listeners. I think the key question here is, at least for myself, would be, would you think, or would you assess that the elections were basically necessary to be held now, or it would have been better off to maybe, push the elections to a latter time frame where, the missing governorates would be incorporated into the election process. The March 10th agreement with SDF would have been implemented. The civil registries, which is often been used as an excuse or a justification from the central authorities or the transitional authorities to not be able to hold a truly representative election process. So based on all these things, do you think there might have been a main reason for pushing those elections in such a hastily matter or in such a quick process in your assessment?
Well, let me start by saying that 2 years ago, in TDA, we produced a comprehensive report about the necessary conditions to carry out proper elections in Syria. And I think to have the proper elections in Syria, or relatively proper, because it's a worldwide thing that no, there is no perfect moment for carrying out elections in any country, but there is some necessary preconditions for that. We need 2 years of preparations. We need to have a national consensus. We need to negotiate an electoral law. We need to prepare the census. And the civil registry. We need to train the judges and to build an independent commission for oversighting the elections, and to train civil society to monitor elections. So you need and to negotiate, for example, potential role of the possible role for the UN and oversighting the elections. You need 2 years of preparations. But in our case, in the current case of Syria, as a transitional authorities, you need someone or you need a party, you need a body that execute or does 2 things. First, oversight the executive branch of the government. Second, adopt the necessary legislations during the transition. And with the current assembly, It's even denied the possibility to oversight the executive branch of the government. According to the declaration, again, it's entitled to issue laws, approve budgets, sign, approve international treaties, and can hold hearing sessions for ministers. So the checks and balance does not really exist within the system.
But that's just hearing sessions that at the end of the day do not have any virtual authority.
Absolutely no authority whatsoever. I remember in myself at the beginning of the year, maybe in March or February, I can't remember exactly. I wrote an article in a Lebanese website called Darash, and I said, well, since the Victory Conference granted all these powers to President Ahmed al-Shara, and instead of going into this complicated process that will not satisfy so many people within the Syria, and in my opinion, it creates more problem than we need. President Shara could do some consultations, could ask the help of a group of people who represents different groups, different ethnicities, different religious groups, different political orientations within the country that are well known, respected, have the sufficient knowledge within the community, and tell them, hey, listen, we need to have a body that oversaw the executive branch of the government and that carry out the necessary, issue the necessary laws and legislation during the transitional period until the country is ready to carry out proper elections. And they could form that, and maybe they could ask the help of the UN Special Envoy Office for that. For example, I think there were so many ways to fill this gap, and instead of carrying out elections the way we saw. That is, I believe, in my opinion, it's weakening and maybe putting the credibility of the transition under jeopardy, under certain level of jeopardy.
I think we were discussing previously, or you mentioned that the current Syrian parliament or the elections that were held were quite critical and crucial for Syria's political transition. Perhaps maybe you can walk us through why that is the case and what impact do you think this would have on Syria's legislative future and political transition more broadly in the future?
Well, it's crucial and critical for two reasons. First, there is a problem. There is a problem. We have to admit that there is a problem with the credibility and the inclusiveness of the political transition in Syria, especially after the massacres on the coast, after the massacres in Suwaida, and after the stagnation in the implementation of March 10th agreement between the central transitional government and SDF. So the credibility is at stake. And these elections or the formation of a people's assembly should had been done in a better manner that help in building up or contributing to help building up national consensus within Syria, and that didn't happen. The opposite happened. I think, as I explained before, even within the camp of the revolutionaries, this assembly is not representing to all of them. Is not representative to all of them. The second is the current assembly is tasked to issue laws and regulations in a very critical moment, and very critical legislations and laws. Let me give you some examples. Transitional justice law, the reform of judiciary, foreign investment, any laws are related to reconstruction, the budget, approving the budget. If we take an example like violations of HLP rights in Syria, it needs an arsenal. There is an arsenal of legislation that needs to be dealt with to address this issue that is impacting the fate and destiny of millions of displaced in Syria. So I have a concern that is the current assembly capable of carrying out this mission when you have individuals who do not belong to political parties, to political groups, and even the relationship with civil society organizations who have the experience and knowledge. There is a big question mark about that. I hope it's going to be fixed in the future. But there are several serious questions about the capability of this council, of this assembly. Therefore, I think the formation process was not adequate enough to stand for the current challenges that the transition in Syria is going through.
Amazing. And would you say that how would you assess the process itself, the election process itself? The committees, the basically indirect voting mechanism that was implemented, and what were some of the key shortcomings that you basically identified in that process?
Well, there are many of them, and as you know, we released a paper just outlining in details what the challenges and the shortcomings of this process. But let me focus on several things. First, the criteria was ambiguous in terms of what was the criteria for selecting the subcommittees and the electoral colleges. There was vague criteria and vague process. There was no clear process in terms of how you are selecting, how the subcommittees and the electoral colleges were selected. Second, the durations, the periods were very short and hassle in a way that, for example, when we delivered the training to the subcommittees of Damascus suburbs, and Tortosa, we explained to them the provisional voting system, and we told them it's your task as a subcommittee to carry out sufficient and proper consultations within your communities, within the communities that you are tasked to form the electoral colleges for them, to come up with the best candidates for the electoral colleges in a way that reflects the diversity of your communities and your constituencies, and the necessary qualifications for the tasks that this assembly is entitled to. They were given 3 days, and so it's proven that this is not enough period of time to carry out proper consultations. One of the other challenges is, for example, the representation of women. It's about only 6%.
Yeah,
it's only about 6%, and other groups within the assembly,
but I guess
are not represented.
I guess the counter argument here is that Syria is, at least that's the government stance, that Syria is a conservative society, so we cannot force people to participate in that process. And that's obviously their perspective on it, which is true to some extent, but how would you recommend that be addressed in the future, or what could have been done better to further entice, women participation, the participation of minorities specifically as well?
Well, it brings us back to the first step, to the first point. We're not talking about an assembly that represents the Syrian people. We're talking about electoral colleges that were selected by committees appointed by the president. This assembly represents the political arena of the president and of the current transitional authorities. It does not represent the Syrian society. We cannot, so the argument is not valid. We cannot say that the Syrian society is conservative, so this result is expected. No, that's not valid. And the second point is the system itself. They said there is a quota of representation of women of 20% within the electoral college.
Unofficial, from my understanding, was like not really a clear quota, but they aspire to achieve that. It wasn't like codified.
No, they said that there should be a quota within the electoral colleges, but when it comes to the calculation of the winners, the quota was not applied. And I discussed this point with the High Commission. I told them that you should adopt a system where the quota can apply not only within the electoral college itself, but the list of the winner candidates. And they said no. So basically, I think the system could
so the quota, just to understand, the quota was for within the subcommittees itself, but not in.
We're talking about 3 levels. We're talking about the High Commission, subcommittees, and the electoral colleges.
Yeah,
the quota was
codified,
enforced within the electoral colleges only.
Okay, so not the lower layers.
Yes, not the final layers, if I would say, the final, which the assembly members, I would say.
And that also includes the disabilities quota, I think, which was around 3%.
All quotas,
Yeah.
The appeals, for example, they opened the door for the appeals, for the challenges, they received challenges. There was not transparency whatsoever in terms of the number of challenges they received, who was challenged, who was not. And then they produced a new list of members of electoral colleges that is different from the old one, from the first one.
Of candidates.
And of candidates. No, the electoral colleges themselves.
Themselves, okay.
Yeah, the electoral colleges themselves. And then nobody told these people who were excluded from the electoral colleges on what basis they were excluded. Were they challenged? What was the challenge? What is the result? Did they have the chance to defend themselves? So they said, no, this is different. These are not challenges. So there was vagueness and ambiguity about the formation of the electoral colleges.
So there was no opportunity to challenge the appeal itself. So if, say, I was a candidate and I got excluded, did I have a time? There was no time frame to basically find out what the justification is or challenge it in the first place.
I found my name. I found my name in the first list of the members of the Electoral College of Damascus, for example. Few days later, I was excluded without any justification. The only rational justification should be that I was challenged. My nomination was challenged, and the challenge was accepted. But nobody told me whether that the reality or not. There was no transparency. They didn't
And
tell us
how can someone challenge it? What was it based on? Two people basically claiming
they said
person
that they assign judges within each governorate, and people who have challenges, have claims, they can go there and they submit a claim. So we don't know how many claims that were submitted and what were the results of these claims, and how people on what basis people were excluded. So the whole it was ambiguous and vague. Even after the elections of the People's Assembly members were carried out, then the results were given only few hours to be challenged officially. So again, there was no enough period of time for anyone, for example, in Damascus, to challenge the election process itself and say, well, there was problems within the election process. So the entire process, is suffering of very serious shortcomings, and I believe it was not proper enough, it was not representative enough, and it was not transparent enough.
And again, just linking it to the question of your assessment on why this process was rushed. And I don't know if you alluded to that into the recent report that TDA has published. And maybe you can also share some of the key findings. But the key question here is, if the key infrastructure was not ready to conduct a housing conditions that was even outlined by the transitional authority, why rush the process? Is it a political calculation specifically? Or is it...
Well, and again, we are here trying to analyze this rushing politically, because there is no constitutional time frame for that. Again, and this is important to take to consider. I believe the current transitional authorities are seeing increasing international support and regional support, and I think they would like to tell everyone that, hey, listen, we completed the formation of our transitional authorities bodies, and here we have legislation, the People's Assembly, we have a transitional authority, we have this, we have that, and I believe they need an assembly to issue necessary laws for them. So politically, they feel that they can go down that road. They need just to continuously sending positive signal, and these signals are going to be welcomed internationally and regionally. And in the same time, technically, on the procedure level, they need also they have an arsenal, as far as I know, they have an arsenal of legislation projects that need to be submitted to that assembly to be adopted. So I attribute that to these two reasons.
And what is the mechanism to basically reject those articles if they were to be presented to the Legislative Assembly? What authority does the Legislative Assembly have basically to reject any of those proposals?
Well, the Assembly is either develop proposals them itself or receive proposals from the presidency. If for example, let's take let's assume a scenario that they receive a proposal from the president, and then the majority rejected that proposal.
2/3, I
The
think, is the required
the
vote.
president can send it back to the assembly, and in that case, they need 2/3 majority to
For it to
reject.
be completely
Yeah.
rejected.
Absolutely. And the same rule applies if the president objected a proposal by the assembly.
So there needs to be 2/3 approving for this.
Yes.
Yeah.
In case the president rejected a proposal or insisted on a proposal.
And of course, we have to take into account that 1/3 of the remaining seats of the 210 seats are appointed directly by the executive branch as well.
Absolutely.
Okay. And where does that leave us in terms of other types of checks and balances that the legislative body has over the executive branch? For example, if a presidential decree is issued by the presidency, does the legislative branch or the People's Assembly have the right to repeal it?
Again, this is not clear even within the constitution. So far, the practice that the president used to issue presidential decrees. In theory, he should stop that
As soon as there's
formation. Yeah, as soon as there is an assembly in place. And if he wants to issue a law, he should send it to the assembly, to send a proposal to the assembly to adopt it or and to walk through or ratify it or whatever. So we have to see. But I think the checks and balances within the system is being undermined because now so far if you read the constitutional declaration, no authority whatsoever can hold the president accountable. He is not being held accountable before any authority, neither the People's Assembly nor the constitutional declaration court, which he appoints, by the way. He should appoint a constitutional court, and he did not so far. So basically, we have a president who is immune. He cannot be held accountable before any authority in that sense. And of course, he chairs the High Judiciary Council, in addition to the Minister of Justice, and I think one deputy of the Minister of Justice and the General Prosecutor. And so basically, we have a president who is heading the judiciary, heading the executive branch of the government, and appointed the entire People's Assembly.
Indirectly.
At that time, direct 1/3 of them indirectly, and the 2/3 indirectly.
Yeah.
Has
1/3 directly and 2/3 indirectly.
Yeah, and in practice, in practical terms, he has the power to veto any proposal from or any law from the People's Assembly.
And I think in one of our previous discussions, you mentioned something that quite resonated with me along the lines that that the elections have inherently been stripped from their political nature. What does that look in practice, and what makes an election depoliticized?
Yeah, because now we don't have political parties law, and the formation of political parties is banned so far. There are informal bodies that calling themselves parties, but they are not being dealt with as parties, as political parties. The members of the People's Assembly are individuals representing themselves, and so you feel that these members of the People's Assembly are not political figures, are not political are members of political blocs or political actors in that sense. They are people who belong to the mass, who may have, of course, good reputation, and we're not here talking about their individual characters.
Yeah, and we're revolutionaries and part of
absolutely.
Yeah.
But again, they are not political in that sense, and again, when you have an issue with the representation of the Syrian diversity, where people are being dealt when you talk about the diversity, they say, well, there we have Druze, Alawites, Kurds, or whatever. Again, the only interpretation of the Syrian diversity within the formal institution of the country and the state institutions is the ethnic / religious diversity. We're not talking about we're not talking about the political diversity within the society. We have capitalists, we have socialists, we have right, way, left, liberal, conservatives. So we do not talk about these representations, or this kind of representation is being ignored or undermined completely. And that takes us to the political programs of these parties. So we're not talking about competing political blocs that or political figures that are competing on political agendas. We have people being selected directly or indirectly from their ethnic and religious communities to discuss laws, to adopt budgets, and to hold hearing sessions for the ministers and to ratify international treaties.
And with that in mind, would you say that there will be a role for potential political parties to be formed in the future? So obviously now this is one of the key amendments or key laws that are supposed to be, discussed by the newly elected People's Assembly. Once obviously the 1/3 of the votes gets announced, and that's also a different topic that we'll discuss in a bit. But what do you think will be the shape of the political system in Syria by the end of the transitional period of 4 years? Do you think that there will be political parties? Do you think that President Ahmed Shara himself will likely also, establish a political party and be, at the helm of it of some sorts? Where do you see the political space in Syria in light of the current, People's Assembly elections?
Yeah. The constitutional declaration stipulates the establishment of or adoption of political parties or laws and allowing the political parties to be active in Syria. My concern is what are the conditions to be imposed on these political parties, first. Second, what about the political system and the electoral system within the country? Is the electoral system will be based on partisan system? Will be the political parties be allowed to form their lists of candidates to the parliament and go through for the elections competition as political parties, holding having alliances? Or we will continue with this selection of individuals, individualization of the People's Assembly? Would President Ahmed Shara establish a party himself? I think he already has one. The Hayat Tahrir al-Sham was in theory dissolved, but in practice, we have this High Commission of the Political Affairs, and they intervene in every aspect of
part of the
political
foreign
life,
ministry.
which is part of the foreign ministry, but they intervene in every aspect of political life. I met two of them in Homs and Aleppo over the past couple of weeks, and I was surprised when they told me that they were receiving delegations from Christian spiritual leaders discussing their needs and their affairs. So if you belong to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, why are you discussing public services with certain
Domestic
groups
issues.
within the community on domestic issues? So I think President Ahmed Shara already has his party. Will he make it an official one? Will he adopt a new version of the ruling party of state and society, as Al-Ba'ath Party used to do? These are open questions for the future. But I have concerns, serious concerns, about the direction the political development is taken in Syria. Are we going to see a pluralistic political system that allows the vibrant political life and vibrant civil society to be active within the political life of Syria or not? I'm very concerned. I'm very concerned. Are we going to see a political system that enjoys a high degree of checks and balances within the system? I'm really concerned about that.
And with that in mind, would you say it's too late? Is there still room to maneuver or rectify the decisions that are being taken? And could the remaining 1/3 of seats be that are directly appointed by the executive branch in collaboration or in addition to the 3 provinces that are still, or governors that are still missing, recalibrate the current equation? Or do you think that that is highly unlikely for the foreseeable future? So what difference will those make, basically?
I think there is always an opportunity to fix and rectify and change course and recalibrate the any equation. my problem is not whether it's too late or not. My problem now about the intentions, the policies. I used to say that the People's Assembly, the way the People's Assembly would be formed, is the last card that will be played and tell us about the real intentions or the real characteristic of the political system of the transition. I could understand that President Ahmed al-Shara is in a hard position, very difficult position. He cannot form a cabinet that where members of this cabinet belongs to certain political blocs and parties that will obstacle him. But I don't see any justification for having no accountability within the system or having a people's assembly that is not representative enough for the Syrian society. So we need to see an implementation of the March 10th agreement. We need to see national reconciliation that addresses the the repercussions of the mass violations of human rights that took place in Suwaida and the coast. We need to see more powers being granted to the People's Assembly in terms of oversighting the executive branch of the government. I don't know the 1/3 that is being left to the president to select with respect to the members of the assembly is going to be enough to fix the problem of the diversity or the change of the diversity of the Syrian society within the assembly. I doubt, to be honest. This assembly, we are gonna live with this assembly for 30 months. Again, I don't know.
With the possibility for it to be extended, or has it been decided on based on constitutional
Again, the
decisions
constitution gives this power to the president.
Okay, so it
To
can
the
maybe
president.
either be extended or not.
Yes, yes, and we don't know how we can move from this. It's not clear how we can move from this assembly to a new one. Also, we suggested also a group. You know, I myself participated in the National Dialogue Conference that day, and although despite all the reservations on the way that the conference was carried out, we suggested to the president, we sent an appeal, and 2,000 people signed with us this petition. We suggested to start from where we ended, from the final communique of the National Dialogue Conference, and for the president to lead a serious, genuine, inclusive national dialogue process that includes everyone and that discuss the current challenges of the transition period and the future, and to create a national consensus about the national agenda. Unfortunately, we were not heard. We know that the message, the petition was delivered to the presidential palace. We are sure of that, but there was no reaction whatsoever.
Do you think that there is any major obstacle that's preventing this process from happening? Because I do think that at the end of the day, it is of the best interest of the current administration in Syria and the transitional authorities to engage in a conclusive national dialogue process. And it not only feeds and preserves a better domestic representation, but also includes or increases the international legitimacy of the whole process. So based on that, what do you think is the main reason for why there has been any response or any collaboration? Or rather a positive response from the transitional authorities to engage seriously in this national dialogue process?
Well, I can think of several reasons. Again, I don't have information. I'm just
based on your assessment, obviously.
First, I think they feel that the transitional authorities, they feel that they enjoy the support of sufficient majority among the Arab Sunnis in Syria. They feel that they are supported also by the region or by the international actors. So they don't see the need for that. They know that there is a need to address the issue with SDF one way or the other. They thought that a military solution is viable for the situation of Suwaida. Apparently, it's not. I think they are dismissive of this idea that Syria needs serious, genuine, inclusive dialogue, national dialogue about the transition and the future. I think they have their own agenda, and they feel that this agenda is receiving enough support, again, according to their calculus, inside the country and outside the country. And I disagree with that view. I think at the end of the day, unless we have an inclusive and genuine consensus within the country, we will continue to face challenges and problems, and the divisions within Syria will continue.
Because
And
I
if we
think
look
this
at the
also, sorry to interrupt, but I also think because this feeds into the issue of national identity as well. Today,
absolutely,
Syria lacks a clear national identity, and that is necessary to
absolutely,
govern as well.
absolutely, the national identity in Syria now, we have conservative Arab Sunni that they are majority, and we have groups of minorities that we are gonna take care of them and include them in one way or the other in the system. We're not talking about the Syrian national identity that is uh, ban all these sub identities within the society. So it's a fragmented one.
Mhm.
If you see, it's a very fragmented identity. Now, if you want to identify yourself as Syrian, you cannot avoid the second question: Are you Arab Muslim? Are you Arab Sunni Syrian? Are you Kurdish Syrian? Are you Christian Syrian? Because it differs. We do not enjoy equal opportunities and equal stands within the new Syria, within the newborn Syria,
Yeah, the emerging
uh,
Syria, shall we say?
or the emerging Syria.
Yep.
And if we looked at the history of President Ahmed Shara and HTS, there are a lot of the people who negotiated and reached agreements with other groups, even within the revolution. They have a complicated history. The coalition they built also that was it was and led the defeat of Assad regime was under their leadership. So they used to that notion that they are the leaders and the others have to follow them, have to be under their leadership. They did not used to go into equal partnerships. So I think it is in their mentality, it's in their DNA, and in my opinion, I may again, it's my assessment, it's a personal assessment. It may justify the political behavior or their policy.
And do you think that the People's Assembly that is going to emerge is a reflection of that notion?
I think so. Yeah, absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. If you look at the composition of the assembly, absolutely, they needed an assembly that is supportive for them. They're not thinking of an assembly that holding them accountable. It's an assembly that is supporting their work. It's not it's not an assembly that represents the people and holding them accountable. So the whole philosophy behind this assembly is different from what we aspire for.
And before we start wrapping up, I think one key positive thing that I've been hearing from a lot of people engaging with the current transitional period, and obviously we've been touching on some of the shortcomings, but at least the notion that they're a bit more receptive for feedback. There is somewhat of an open door policy, in contrast to the previous administration, but obviously had nothing of that for the past 5 decades. And truth has to be said that there are at least on paper more willing to and more receptive to feedback. And based on that, basically, if you were advising the current transitional government with the knowledge that the elections have been concluded, what could you name like 2 or 3 concrete steps that they need to take into account for the next electoral cycle, implementable and tangible ones, ideally as well?
Before giving the advices, I think all of us, we have to refrain from comparing them with the old regime. The Assad regime is incomparable with anyone. I think
Certainly.
it's not justice for them, not justice for us to compare them with them. They are incomparable. I could go back to my hometown only once the Assad regime fell, and we were, and I live there now with all my positions. Um, so, uh, 3 advices. First, national dialogue. Resume the national dialogue. Let lead more inclusive, genuine dialogue about the transition period and about the future. Second, please consult with the civil society and the political groups who are outside the People's Assembly about the legislations that you are to adopt when it comes to all the legislation, the transitional justice, the political parties, the investment laws, etc., etc. Make the People's Assembly an assembly that is interactive with the political spectrum and with the civil society in large. And third, implement March 10th agreement, and this is for both parties who co-signed that agreement, and include the violations of mass violations of human rights that took place in the coast and Suwaida in the National Transitional Justice Plan, and to open up the opportunity for reconciliation within the country.
And that's obviously on a domestic front. Maybe a quick follow-up question would be towards, foreign capitals from Brussels to Washington. What role does the international community have to play in basically implement those recommendations that you outlined? And basically, how do you assess the Western policymakers, their perspective towards the current election process, or the election of the People's Assembly that just occurred?
What I know from different events, from different incidents, that the current transitional authorities in Syria are taking the international support and the Arab support and the regional support for granted. So they feel that, well, they can continue with their policy and they will continue to be supported. And that message has been delivered by the international diplomats who are meeting with them and by the international actions towards Syria. We need the international support. We need the regional support. We need the Arab support. We need this transition to succeed. We do not need this transition to fail. And we need
Definitely.
the Arabs and the region and the international actors to be partners to all of Syria, not one party of Syria. And you know the Arab proverb: your sincere friend is the one who tells you the truth, not the one who believes you all the way.
Yeah, definitely.
So we need this kind of approach. We need this kind of constructive but critical engagement in the same time, and to listen to the other voices within Syria.
And in terms of the elections itself, do you think that there's any room for maneuvering, or that the international community can still play a role to kind of change the trajectory of the electoral process that just occurred, or is that ship has basically sailed now?
I think that ship has sailed, and I think the only remaining card in pocket is the 1/3 of the president. He could improve the situation. He cannot fix everything. He cannot fix all the problems. What happened just happened. But within his third, within creating an environment where this assembly is interactive and listening to other parties in Syria and with this the political blocs and civil society and other groups, at least we can decrease the damage and improve or increase also our opportunities.
Mutasem, obviously we were discussing some of the shortcomings of the transitional period more broadly, but also the election process, or the parliamentary election process. In your assessment, if this trajectory continues, what do you think will be the short to medium and long-term potential implications of this current trajectory that the current transitional government is taking, both in terms of like on a civil society level, but also maybe on a national level as well?
Yeah, I can think of a couple of consequences. Well, first we have to admit that the country is divided now. It's not only divided into geography and peripheries; it's divided psychologically. I think some people or some groups of Syrian people do not feel that they are represented or included in this transition. To the contrary, they see that they are being victims now of this transition. I think if the trajectory continues, I think these rifts will deepen. And when such rifts are deepening in a society, they bring with them all kind of escalations: violence, fragmentation, economic hardships, instability. I'm very concerned about that. Now, if you want to lead a national reconstruction program and you want to bring foreign investment in the country, and this is necessary for Syria, you need an environment where rule of law is implied, when the people of that country is in harmony. Well, of course, nobody will agree 100%, but at least they feel that, well, we are part of a transition. We're not divided. And let's look at the other Arab Spring countries. Look at what happened in Libya and Sudan, in Yemen, other places. In Sudan, for example, when the transition took place, they were celebrated, and they lived in an amazing 2 years of transition before everything exploded. because they did not address the serious and deep political challenges. They just pushed the challenge ahead of them. And I don't want to see Syria pushing the problems ahead of them. If the current trajectory continues, the problems are gonna and challenges are gonna are going to pile up. And this is very dangerous. This is will not help the transitional authorities to bring all Syrians to its project. Will not help the transitional authorities to provide stability within the country and to build a cohesive army or cohesive security apparatuses. And again, the credibility of the transition will continue to be at stake. And countries torn by war like Syria, they do not rise immediately. They will go definitely into a period of hardships and challenges. And the only or the most important weapon in your hand to face these challenges is the unity of your people. If the people is not united, if the people is fragmented and divided, the challenges are gonna pile up. And this is why I'm concerned.
Makes sense. And I think one final question to our Western audiences. Obviously, various international capitals from Brussels to DC have watched the elections unfold. Do you think that there is any key recommendations that you'd like to provide them with in order to kind of rectify some of those flaws that we've been seeing in the current transitional period? Ideally actionable ones rather than, holistic ones, so to speak. So things that are actually tangible and are within the capacity of the current capitals to do.
Well, I think they have to encourage the Syrian government, the Syrian transitional government, to find a way to deal with the repercussions of the current of the recent elections, election of the formation of the People's Assembly and the entire transition so far. The first step is to be honest to themselves. It's not useful to continue. Well, the other day I heard Mr. Thomas Barak saying everything is Syria and is going in the right direction. This is not true. So I at the very beginning, they have to start by being honest to themselves and listening to all voices. We need their help. Syria, without the help of Turkey, the Arab countries, the Europeans, and the Americans, will not be able to overcome the current challenges. But we need them to engage constructively but critically, and to listen to all Syrian voices. We came up through over the discussion. We suggested many actions to be taken to address the repercussions of the current shortcomings of the transition. I invite them to look into these recommendations, to discuss these topics with diverse group of Syrian society, and to listen to the all voices, and to encourage the government and to help the government to take these actions.
And obviously, I invite all our speakers to check out the new policy paper that was published by TDA, basically analyzing all the election process as well. So I'm sure that will be also a useful read for all our listeners as well. With that, I'd like to thank you, Mutasem. Thank you very much for being our first guest, and I hope you enjoyed this discussion. We look forward to hopefully having you on board as well in several further episodes as well if the opportunity arises. I'm sure Syria will continue to be relevant in the near to medium future, and will both keep us busy. With that, I would like to thank you, Mutasem, for this fruitful discussion and conversation.
Well, thank you, Sami. That was my honor to be your first guest. I wish you and the team the best of luck in the podcast. I trust that it will be very interesting and very useful, and I look forward for continuous discussion with you.
Thank you very much, Mutasem. It means a lot. Have a good one. Thank you.
You too. Bye-bye.
That was Mutasem Al-Syoufi, the Executive Director of the Day After organization, offering a grounded look at Syria's parliamentary elections and what they reveal about Syria's political transition. The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the guest and do not necessarily reflect the positions of the Syria Spectrum, the Tahrir Institute for Middle East Policy, or the Change for Syria network. A big thank you to our incredible production team for their dedication and hard work. This series wouldn't have been possible without their commitment over the past several months leading up to this episode. I'd like to thank our researchers, Zakaria Al-Jmali and Bakr Atasi, our technical lead, Roni Hamada, videographer, Adel Rawas, graphic designers, Hussein Al-Ghazi, Hashim Haj Bakri. From research and coordination to editing and design, your efforts made this podcast possible, and we're deeply grateful for everything you've done. The Syria Spectrum podcast is produced with the support of the Tahrir Institute for Middle East Policy and in partnership with the Change for Syria network. I'm your host, Sami Akil, and this is the Syria Spectrum. Thanks for listening, and see you again in the next episode.